Welcome to Resist as Forest, a public environmental storytelling action. My name is Hania Mucho. I am the curator of the initiative, and together with Pablo de Soto, the creator of Resist as Forest, we want to introduce our intervention to you. Resist as Forest was a public environmental action and a collaborative experiment in what Pablo calls techno-commoning, a kind of undisciplined transnational decolonial environmental storytelling that Marco Armero practices at and promotes at KTH. This public intervention took place in Trondheim, an aspiring Silicon Fjord port city in a South Sami region in the throes of green colonialism conflict, and also in this town, which is home to the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, Norway's largest public research university. Resist as Forest consisted of a 3D projection, an immersive soundtrack, a poetry recitation, a street theater, and it was staged during the global climate strike on September 27, 2019. It took place in Adressaparken, an interactive urban park in Trondheim, which was awarded South by Southwest Place by Design Prize. And it is a very interesting space because it is co-owned and co-managed by the university, by NTNU, as well as the Trondheim municipality and Adresseavisen, the oldest newspaper in Norway. We are truly indebted to hundreds of collaborators, co-creators, partners, participants, and we don't have enough time to acknowledge them by name in the video, but we urge everybody to linger on the end credits for these presentations, which reveal the truly collective and participatory character of our endeavor.
Resist as Forest was created during my 2019 Artec artistic residency. Initially, we thought of this project as a project for the public. Ultimately, we co-created the intervention with our students and the public. It truly was a forest of collaborators who made this work possible, becoming a collaborative multimedia installation, an immersive storytelling initiative, exhibit, stage, and perform at the Adressaparken in Trondheim, Norway, during the global climate crisis. In this video, we want to walk you through this project, how we get there, our process and method, and we would like to reflect on the affordances of such activist work in the context of Streams 2021 focus on transformative environmental humanities during the Q&A.
Eliane Broom writes, "The forest is at the very core of all we have. This is the real home of humanity. The fact that many of us feel far away from it only shows how much our eyes have been contaminated, formatted, and distorted. For us," she continues, to be capable of resisting, we must become the forest and resist like the forest that knows it carries ruin within itself, that it carries within itself both what it is and what it no longer is. We must lend shape to this political, affective feeling in order to lend meaning to our actions. This means shifting a few tectonic plates in our own thinking. We have, she says, to decolonize ourselves.
Resist as Forest was initially created in response to the deforestation crisis in Brazil, and its conceptual form took his guiding metaphor from this work of Brazilian investigative journalist Eliane Broom. Broom says that in order to respond to the deforestation crisis, we must learn how to resist as forests, like the forest in the English version of her article in The Guardian, shifting how we think about the global space, putting Amazon at the center of our world. So I, Hania, and a whole city of collaborators took this metaphor for collective action and materialized it, concretized it on an unprecedented lateral and vertical urban scale. Together with the NTNU Arte Collective, volunteers from all continents and many parts of Norway. We also perform it in the Adressaparken outdoors.
So one of the interesting questions was, how did we get from an individual artist in residence program to this multimedia public environmental storytelling engagement, including some 30 co-creators and hundreds of participants from across the city's social strata? In the video, we want to unpack the hardware, but also the humanware of the interventions, and reflect on the process of our collaborative work. As Pablo mentioned, NTNU Artec funded the project, but while this institutional and technological infrastructure was and support was crucial, so was the humanware of Trondheim and across the world, and our own collaborations across disciplinary boundaries. Resistas Forest, in other words, is an instructive lesson in artivism, in university-city collaboration, in transdisciplinarity and transmodal processes, methods, and infrastructures.
We will first talk about both of us. I and Hania, that is environmental humanities scholars, based in completely different disciplines, using different methods, and operating at different scales. So what did I bring to the initiative? I am an experimental architect, media artist, and radical cartographer, and practitioner of critical internet art. I was then based in Brazil, and as part of my artist in residence, I could develop any transmedia art project. And I arrived in Trondheim at the height of the Amazon deforestation devastation in Brazil, the moment when the Amazon Fund was uncontinued. And since I had access to Dresa Parken, which is an interactive public park, which is equipped with various environmental sensors, speakers, and exhibit space, I wanted to use this unprecedented Techno-Commons opportunity. So after reflecting on the paradox of this technological park existing far away from the environmental crisis, I wanted to use these technological urban commons to connect it to the Amazon crisis. But I think the whole process began with what Anna Singh et al. Call a process of noticing what is around, the biosocial space available in Trondheim, and also like local environmental crisis.
Pablo brought his legendary Architectura work and disobedient use of hardware and software experience to this project. He is a cartographer of environmental disasters. He often maps not simply the zones of environmental devastation, but also knowledge in the making and the ways in which the socio-political landscape we live in transform. And this was what drew me to his work, this capacity to map a space, a people, a political or environmental grief, but also an emergence, an artivist social movement, a forest seedling. I come from a very different field. I'm a literary scholar working across human rights and political ecology. I'm also an occasional curator, but I mostly work with words. I am oftentimes very involved in civic engagement and critical pedagogy practices, and I strongly believe in Kathleen Fitzpatrick's idea of academic insurgents. And I follow what Marco Armero models at KTH and more broadly, sort of unruly, disobedient humanities. But as I said, I usually work with storytelling, that is words and bodies on a much smaller scale than Pablo. Pablo's medium is cartographic and visual, mine is textual, oral. I work with slow methods, and Pablo is truly fast and rapid. So needless to say, our collaboration was as generative as it was contentious. I brought a certain slowness to the project, and attentiveness to words, to language, to the pulse of our city, to local environmental crises, and a knowledge of our permanent and transient residents in the city.
Overall, we battle each other a lot and learn a tremendous deal from each other. Together, after many heated brainstorming sessions, we took public storytelling and action to an urban city-level, vertical and multidimensional scale. During the deforestation crisis and the local green colonialism conflicts in Norway, attempt tempting to attending to the nuances of our geopolitical and institutional location. So about the transmedia and transmodal form. Now, in a few words, on the multimodal and multitemporal format of the intervention, to give you a sense of how something that could have become an environmental art exhibition operated as a collective and multimodal performative intervention. Note the different modalities, scales, and temporalities of storytelling. One of the city-scale elements was a 3D animation created by Siddharth Gautam Singh and projected on Olav Skartalen, the Symphony's building facade. And the animation was about the way a forest resists fire as a biological system. Forests are resistant to wildfires through their seed banks. So the animation simulates a portion of the forest that goes through a fire and then evoke the forest resilience to fires via the seeds. And the urban projection also included the phrase resist as forest in 25 languages, including South Sami and Arabic, the local indigenous language of Norway, never projected on such a scale.
There were also other important elements in our intervention. For instance, the Resistance Forest opened with a Becoming Bodies public warm-up led by Dr. Alex Murray Leslie and Ada Joel. Another important element was a collective multilingual environmental storytelling session and poetry recitation led by the phenomenal Olga Lemon.
Nature never became a toy to the wise spirit.
And also a street theater led by the Improv group.
That is not very common.
In this image, you also see the actual human bodies on the ground. And I think what's fascinating about this intervention was that we managed to get students, migrants, activists, academics, but also administrators to share the same public space together.
Let's hear an excerpt of the sound composition.
जंगल जसरी नै प्रतिरोध गरौ Gjør motstand som skogen. Résiste comme la forêt. Сопротивляйся, словно лес. Resistir como un bosque. El bosque como resistencia.
Opieraj się glas.
Resisti come la foresta.
So you're hearing just a short clip of a longer collaborative sound, which was a composition co-produced by NTNU students, mastered by Sriji Resta, recorded by Ada Joel, and it included a soundscape of public domain Amazon wildlife sounds, Frank Ekeberg's Norwegian recording of rainforests, and human voices from Amazon forest defenders, local international artists, scholars. So it was mixed by NTNU Music and other students under the guidance of Unurandra Einarsdottir, Ada Joel, and Alex Murray Leslie. And this sounds composition lent voice to what Resistance Forest political affecting feeling could sound like a kind of mantra, with sounds and words resonated in different languages across the piece. Even if Adresa Park and just have a few trees itself, the sound coming from the several speakers in the park turned the space into a cyber forest, connected the audio senses of the public with the Amazon and Norwegian forest.
We want to conclude by saying that we really work very intently for several weeks to produce this global climate strike intervention. And maybe it exceeded our expectations, becoming an urban epic and an urban theater of sorts. But we also want to emphasize that this was not an end or an end goal for us to just create this one intervention. And it's also very important that the university pulled funding from the NTNU Artec program shortly after. So there were multiple consequences to our action. But we also want to emphasize that the immersive environmental storytelling we engaged in involve both the infrastructure, the hardware of the park, the projectors, the speakers, the artwork, but also we want to emphasize that it involved us, the city, and academic human work, scholars, artists, administrators, migrants, senior activists, and so on. So in many ways, we tapped into what Abdulmalik Simon refers to as people as infrastructure. We, of course, needed technology and needed funding, but it was us, it was we who augmented, expanded this transmedia, environmental and civic action and storytelling with humans providing kind of prosthetic extensions to the machine infrastructure. The collaborative work with students and the public assembly downtown at the Adresa Park and Interactive Park was about what we call the urban chorus, taking center stage and taking over the city, if only for a little bit, and also the skyline. And even though the funding for NTNU Artec was ultimately discontinued, as imagined by Pablo, myself, and the Artec crew, the project is still important, even though it's unfinished. We imagine it as a script to perform by other actors and co-creators. And we want to conclude by saying, after George Lipset, culture is oftentimes a space for a rehearsal for politics. And we see the transformative potential of resistance force in that. Thank you.